Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to start with something I'm certain you did not expect. This book, except I'm not sharing, so you don't see it yet. Sorry. I have had coffee, but as I've said, they only serve defective coffee. And okay, there. Okay, you see this book called The Well of Being? This is the most amazing book I have ever read. It has nothing to do with business. It has everything to do with living true to your own soul. And it is absolutely beautiful. And $35 is so inexpensive, I cannot tell you. I thought I was paying $55. I couldn't find this anywhere. Apparently, this guy's now self-publishing. In fact, I wonder what a signed copy is. I'll probably buy a signed copy. I used to buy these for all my kids and friends, and you can't find it anywhere but here. It's a picture book. It's a picture book, but it basically tells us about who we really are with an amazing artist. This guy, Jean-Pierre Well, um, is an artist, and what he's done throughout the book, some of it is original, and a lot of it is he took famous paintings and modified them, so you'll recognize certain things that, oh, that looks like the Scream, and it's because it was modified off the Scream. So he takes some of the things, but I'll tell you, every now and then, not often, but sometimes I get kind of really stuck. I've got a good support system, a wonderful wife, so I don't get stuck a lot. I also do a lot of coaching, but every now and then I do. And when I do, I pull this book out, and it takes me about an hour to read it. It's a really big book. But it reminds me of how I grew up, reminds me of why humans are the way they are, and reminds me what I'm up to. It is just the most amazing book. These are some of the pictures from it. Um, and Evolve is okay, but it's not nearly as good. This is amazing. I highly recommend it. I'm going to put this in the chat. I mean, it'll be a gift to yourself. You'll want to give it to other people. I'm making no money off this. It's just the most amazing gift. Like I said, I bought like a dozen copies and gave them to my family and associates years ago. And then I couldn't find it anymore. Now all of a sudden, so he's printing it. Oh man, I'm going to buy like 20 of these guys. Highly recommend, highly recommend. There's also, I'll put it in the notes. There's a place to buy some of his artwork, which is really amazing. I've got a little thing here. This one's just a little tiny thing, but it's kind of cute. It says happy, and they let you put 10 letters on it, and I have it's up to you on it to remind me that being happy is up to me. It's not outside circumstance. But he's got a lot better art than that. Okay, I'm going to now get on purpose here. Well, that was on purpose. That's about making us better. You won't regret it. I promise you. You will not regret buying this book. It's amazing, amazing book. Okay, so here's what I want to do. Let's go. I'm going to manage this out on this user group, okay, which y'all should be in now, the Amplio consultant educators. Um, and uh, again, I'll put that group there. Okay. Now what I decided, the reason I'm doing this, I'll just be real candid here. I'm going out of the country for 3 weeks, and I'm going to keep the Amplio University program going with 2 sessions a week. I actually am staying a little longer so I could run a couple of sessions. At first, I was going to like take off completely or take off a week, but I decided I'll just stay out there a few extra days, work out there a couple of days. It'll let me keep that going, and it'll be fun because I just like hanging out in foreign cities, at least the ones I like. But I don't have the time to do this. Okay. So we're not going to have live Amplio community practice sessions, but I don't want to lose any momentum. And I thought a lot about what we could do here that I think is important. So let me give a little bit of a background. See, I really believe, I know this to be true, actually. It's not a belief, I have evidence. Okay. I have evidence that the world is not as tough as it looks. And in some, well, not the world, but knowledge work. Okay, you might have jerks out there, but mostly we're having problems because we're not doing stuff we know how to do. It's like when bridges used to collapse. They didn't know about compression. They didn't know about elasticity. They didn't know about how wind harmonics could affect things. So we are still back where we were 23 years ago when the Agile Manifesto came out. I mean, Scrum, which is still the way most people get introduced to it, is not changed in 23 years for any appreciable amount. But there was all this stuff before Agile that was well known that's starting to get done. But here's why I say, just not trying to brag. I'm trying to say what's possible because I don't claim I do this all the time. Okay. In fact, I didn't do this that often when you consider, maybe a dozen times over 15 years of intense consulting. But when you look at the input and the results, it's staggering. And this doesn't count them all. There were several times where I don't put it as a case study for me because there were several times in a 4 day or 2 to 4 day engagement that somebody in the company, typically a director level, sometimes higher, understood what I was talking about, and then they took it on themselves with no extra guidance whatsoever. I know several people who did that. Okay. One actually ended up working for us after a while. We didn't take him straight from the client, but after he wandered through for a while, then he came to us. It's not that hard. The reason we're having troubles is because we've taken a team-centric approach. And somebody took me to task on this. Yes, one time I did say, and I do believe it, but I'm just not going to get into the hassle of it, that if you look at how many times the team is mentioned versus how many times business, the customer, and management is mentioned, management is inferred but not mentioned. The customer is mentioned 2 or 3 times, business mentioned maybe once, but almost everything in the manifesto refers to the team. Okay. And it's sometimes mentioned, but not always. So here we say development team, but projects are unmotivated. Okay, you could make that the whole thing, but most of these are about the team. This is one of the biggest things I learned back in the 90s. This is why I recommend Chris Alexander's work. So when I was programming, so I started programming in 1970, 71, around that time when I was in college. And one of the things I started as a programmer, they teach you is you kind of figure out what you're supposed to do, like an algorithm. You do this and this and this and this and this. And then all of a sudden then it was 70. I think I learned the equivalent of object oriented in 1980, believe it or not from a language I learned, but I was with a partner who's really one of the like Einstein level genius. I've been fortunate. I've worked with at least three of these types of people. I mean, just like amazingly brilliant. Um, Actually, I think I can think of four people I know, but one I never worked with. One's my brother. Uh, but uh, but I never worked with him, although we talk a lot. But I met one of them at IBM Research, one of them who was getting a PhD at MIT while I was getting my master's, and then my partner here that I had, and he knew small talk, and I learned object orientation from him to some extent. I learned more of it from design patterns later. Um, But but what I learned from programming was you followed an algorithm and you took your objects and put them together and then you worked things. And then when I read Alexander's work, I realized that was all wrong. In fact, I remember thinking there was a sentence in there that was exactly designed for me, which is where he says that our normal way of building things is we take the components and then put them together, but you can't build anything of real high quality doing that way. And I remember when I read that, I said, well, that is how I thought you did it. And then when I read Timeless Way of Building, I realized, no, you have to look at things holistically. So one of the real problems in the agile space, in my mind, is this idea that we can take teams and put them together, or we can take individuals and put them together in the team, and then take teams and put them together in an organization, and that works. And that's totally false. It's totally an ineffective way of doing it. And I've got a lot of evidence. A lot of people have a lot of evidence. If you look at all the new ways of doing things that I think are really good, you've heard me talk about this, and I actually just saw something excuse me. that Niels put out. Now, I'm not a beta codex guy. I'm learning it. Okay. So I can't endorse it directly, but I've read some of his books in the past, and he's a really brilliant guy. And there are a lot of people out there who are taking this more holistic view of things. I just reposted this. He's got it really nice. Definitely going to print this out. Um, and I read his Organized for Complexity, which is a brilliant book. That should be on my top 5 or 6. It wouldn't be in the top 3, but it's as good as the top 3. I pick what I picked to see what would make an impact on your thinking, not so much what gives you some specifics, but actually maybe that should be, but you can only have 3 in the top 3. So it's like 5th, maybe. Brilliant. He's brilliant. He's brilliant. So there are a variety of things that are gone wrong. I think our training is wrong. We need affordable, effective training. We do not have affordable, effective training. By affordable, effective training, I mean training that everybody can be taking and afford it. Having to take 4 2-day workshops is not affordable for people. It just isn't. That's going to cost you $4,000 to $8,000. People don't have $4,000 to $8,000, and it's not effective. Why? Because it's intense. Now, I want to be clear when I say this. And by the way, I'm not just rambling here or ranting here. Okay. Well, maybe I'm ranting, but I'm not rambling. This is a serious issue. This is a serious issue. And it's serious because of what I've been talking about in the technology gap. I'm committed to fixing or helping this, not fixing this. It's always going to be a technology gap. Where we are versus what's possible, and the gap's getting bigger and bigger. And a lot of the problems we have are in the world are because we have a lack of abundance. And I believe we can have abundance. Okay. I'm a little airy-fairy that way, and that's okay. But we can definitely get better than where we are. So what we need to do is raise from what's manifested to what's possible. And this is really what hurts me so much. The adoption of new ideas is inhibited by many, many limiting beliefs. So what what inspired this thing over the next 4 weeks is that maybe you won't be able to get a lot of how to do stuff, but if you can shift your mindset to not be blocked in to stuff that limits your thinking, then you will be able to discover a lot on your own. That's why I'm trying to do this flipped classroom thing. A flipped classroom, by the way, this is an old technique. I don't know how long it's been out there, at least 30 years, maybe 40 years, but at least 30. And more, you see more and more people. There are two quote new training techniques that are decades old in the Agile space that existed before Agile, but are just being discovered. One of them is flipped classroom. I don't know if it was a Harvard professor who invented it or if it was a Harvard professor who may popularized it. I can't remember the total history of it, but it was Harvard where it started out as popular. And what he did was he realized that his classes every year, he said the same things over and over again and then assigned homework. He says, why am I doing this? These people can listen to a video or read a book. It's the same stuff every time. And then they do homework and they're not being any guidance. So he got the idea, maybe I'll let them watch my lectures or listen to my lectures. And then when they come to the classroom, we'll do the homework together. That's flipped classroom. In other words, the homework is now done in the classroom and they're learning, quote unquote, from the professor is done at home. And that's what's called flipped classroom. Obviously, it works better for most people and for mass. I'm not saying it's the best because I tried this actually 2, 3 years ago and it had some problems. And the reason it had some problems, and it may have been my limitation, that's certainly a possibility, is that if you haven't done the same thing over and over and over again, you can't always anticipate their questions when they read it. So there's a certain degree of confusion. Now, I'm on the cutting edge of things, so obviously I'm not to explain things over and over and over again. I know how to do it. I've done it over and over and over, but explaining it takes over and over and over. Like we spent 4 or 5 hours on this GPS and the Amplio system, which is how you diagnose an organization to see what it needs to do and fix and all that. And we keep refining it. It's really coming along really nicely, but some stuff you have to teach by interacting with people and doing it. So flipped classroom is not for everything. But for the basic foundations, I think it is. Now, there's another, I'll just mention it since I said there are two types. The other thing that's gotten popular in the Agile space is what's called back of the room training, which is also decades old. I learned this actually from Alistair Coburn. There was a time years ago he was teaching Agile, I forgot what he called it, but Agile product management. Let's just talk about it like that. He had a really good book. And I had a couple of my people certified by him to teach his stuff. And in that process, I got to know Alistair real well. I love Alistair, by the way, both personally for who he is and for his craziness and for he's a very smart guy. I say that for his craziness with affection, and it's a positive. He's maybe I think he's Australian, so that might explain some of it. That's compliment to Australians. That's compliment. Uh, just want to be clear. But anyway, he introduced me to a book called Synergy, which I would not recommend reading because I'm going to give you the essence of it. You could read it, it's out of print. But he talks about pedagogy in the book. He talks about pedagogy. That's when you teach kids. You know, you say things like, well, just do it because that's the rules. You can't change it. Follow until you understand. Oh, wait a moment. I slipped into talking about Scrum proponents for a second. Didn't mean to do that. Okay, that was a rant. Sorry. But that's what pedagogy is. You tell people do this because, and trust me, and hopefully you'll figure it out, and then you'll be good because I said so. Now, adults don't like to be taught that way. Even when you pay for the course and go to it, they don't like that. Adults do not like to be taught like kids. By the way, kids don't like to be taught that way either, but they don't have much to say about it, so they have to go and put up with it. Andragogy is teaching adults. Now, there's a problem with andragogy. People talk about, oh, yeah, they'll figure it out. And the answer is no, they don't. I got introduced to andragogy in a big way when patterns came out, and everybody started setting up these design pattern study groups. So I said, wow, this is such a great idea. We'll figure this out. So I set up a design pattern study group where I was consulting because I was kind of the guy brought in for C++ and and we tried it and it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Because none of us knew what the hell these things were. And we couldn't figure it out, not in an hour a week. So we tried it a couple of times, had failure. And I said, look, guys, I have some free time. You know, I had a contract with a certain number of hours, a certain amount of discretion time. This was obviously important. So I said, look, let me figure this out and then I'll come back and explain it to you as a peer, not as an instructor. So that's what we did. And then it was brilliant. Then every week I'd spend 3-4 hours figuring out something. This is how I got into teaching design patterns, by the way. Because even in my workshops, when I was the person who knew, I didn't teach them like, oh, I'm the authority. I would teach them like an insightful way to move forward. So synergy is this idea that you want adults to learn on their own, but not really. You have to give them a structure. This is what Alistair taught me. Is he would use this book, he would have them read things and then they'd do exercises. So you create exercises for people to figure out what they need to know instead of make them figure it out. So this training from the back of the room when it's done right is one of these synergy approaches. There are lots of ways you can do it, but what you do is the idea is you create a game or like games are synergistic in that sense. You create a game or a exercise or something where they figure it out themselves, but the structure enables them to do it much faster and get to the result you're trying to get them to. By the way, this is how I coach as well. I don't just sit back and let them figure it out on their own. That takes way too time. Having been a consultant for 3 decades teaches you that time is important and not telling them what to do is just as important. It's tough. You can't tell them, but you only got this amount of time. So what you got to do is ask good questions or see where they are and let them see they're not right. So then they go faster because they're not stuck. See, this is the real thing. It's the inhibition that gets us. This is what people don't quite get. We're inhibited by our belief system. And that's what the next 4 weeks are about, is get rid of the inhibition of things we have learned that we need to unlearn. You can't build a building off of a faulty foundation. You can't build a good approach off of a faulty mindset or set of beliefs. And the Agile space has so many of these, it drives me nuts because I see people spending lots of money being ineffective, then saying, oh, well, we'll just go back to what we were doing ad hoc. It's all common sense. It ain't common sense. If it was common sense, people would be doing it right. Certainly not common. Maybe it's sense. It's sensible. Yes, it's sensible. But it's not quite sensible what we do in the Agile space because nobody really loops back to see if it's working. Okay. So pause if there are any comments you want to make. I'm just going to keep plowing forward for a few minutes and then we're going to go do some things. Okay, this isn't going to be a lecture for an hour, don't worry, or a rant for an hour. Okay, so what I wanted to show, oh, this is another thing I did. Okay, I will come back to that post. Uh, okay, so again, in the LinkedIn groups, and if you're not in this group, you really need to join now. It's free. Uh, and I posted it here. Okay, I'm going to use this because I can use this as an outline. And then what each week, and I've already done one, I did the first week. See, right here, I have a link to the first week, which is this is what we're going to be doing this week. So we're going to have well, this week, 3 weeks off, and then the fourth week, we'll do a recap of things. So here, let me go through the 4 week schedule. It's right here. Okay. Um, you can attend these sessions. Well, you know about this. I put this up here. People can come in. Otherwise, these recordings are going to go up. I'm going to talk about values first and Goldratt's rules of flow. So that the book doesn't necessarily reflect the theme. Okay. What I looked at are what are the 4 themes I want? Values first, inherent simplicity, being an effective value coach, and then going deeper. And then I looked at 4 books I wanted you to read, and you don't need to read them all, but I would recommend it. Goldratt's Rules of Flow. This is funny. This is the best book on introduction to Agile I can think of. It's a brilliant book. It's real simple. And if any of you have a better book, let me know. I mean, I could change. I'm just telling you what I know. This is what I think. The Choice, because that's where I learned about inherent simplicity. And by the way, and I'm going to actually show some things. I think this is it. Yeah. I'm going to show some things about theory of constraint. I just want to get that up there. I'll get back to it later. Um, then how we coach. Coaching, I think, is not being taught well. Even what it is not understood well. I have been blessed with having been working with long-term workshops. I mean, I've been in 3, 4 year-long programs in the 80s that I went to. And these were people who were amazing trainers and amazing personal coaches. And they never just let me flounder on my own, but always would ask pertinent questions. And they had different styles. I remember one guy, I mean, one set would be like in your face a little bit, but that was not normal or usual. That was a different type of workshop. Most of them would have you reflect and guide you through your own thought process, and you could feel almost like you were doing it yourself, but you knew if they weren't there, it wouldn't be happening. That's how I like to coach. That when it's all done, they've figured it out themselves. Now, people don't understand why this is so important. People say, oh, they'll resist it if you tell them. And I say, no, I've had people tell me if I don't tell them right now, they're going to walk out of my workshop. Seriously. Some people want to know. The problem is, not that's at a workshop, that's different. But at an engagement, I remember I was doing this. I was very clear what these guys needed to do. I'm not saying I saw it right away. You got to validate it and see it. But as we're going, I'm really clear what they need to do, but I don't tell them. They want me to tell them. They didn't ask for it, but I know they want me to tell them, but I'm not going to tell them why. Because if I tell them, they will believe me. Oh my God, what's wrong with that? Because now they believe me, they don't believe themselves. So what happens when they have troubles, they'll say, oh, Al was wrong. And they'd be right. Al was wrong to give them the information so they didn't believe themselves. So usually when I've done an engagement, I'm not days ahead of people, but I'm a few hours ahead of people. And they say, well, how can I get them here? And then if I'm wrong, it'll show up. But I've done this enough. I'm usually not wrong. I mean, the initial impression of where to go is wrong. You know what I mean? My first idea of where to go, that's not right. I mean, I ask them, I say that's not right, but they have to discover it themselves because by going deeper, they can move forward. And this is what's missing in coaching is how to do this. And you don't do this by having read a book. You don't do this by going to a workshop. You do this by actually having an experience of it being done. This is how we teach in the Amplio University, is what I'm trying to do here, but I don't do it as much because it's a different purpose, the ACoP. So this is what I want to do, and these are the four things. Okay, so that's the setup. And now I want to go through the first lesson, what we're going to do. Okay. So one of the things we do, I'm going to spend 2 minutes on this because it's way too involved to do more than that. But I want to give you the context for where some of these ideas came from to do this. So this is the PowerPoint there's about half the slides of the Amplio system that we use. And I just want to show you one thing. Now, what's cool about this is I first described something that I had done what I call now, we call it a GPS, the metaphor of where you are, where you want to go. It's a diagnostic tool. This has been in development for 18 years at some level. This is about the fifth generation. But the idea is you have some view. I'm not going to go through it, but the idea is you have some view of the whole organization. You can see kind of the different levels here, and you've got the different capabilities that need to happen. And you could talk to people and see what's wrong. And there are two problems with this. Two things to this. One is they can tell you what's wrong, but they don't tell you what's missing because they don't know what's missing. If you don't know something's missing, you don't know what's missing. They can't tell you we're not doing this good idea because we don't know this good idea. It doesn't make sense. So part of the idea was this, as we were doing this, what occurred to me, and here's the heart of this week right here. Now you've seen this. I've talked about this before. Let me get this board. I know you can't read that yet. Don't worry. I'm going to make it bigger. One of the things I do, and this is why values first. I have to talk about that. I'm maybe getting a little ahead with inherent simplicity here. I guess I would still read them in this order. Well, I got to talk about this. I'm going to talk a little bit about inherent simplicity, the concept of it, but I'm not going to go into it till next week, okay? Because I do need the concept. I'd actually debated which of these should go first, but I'm going to do a little bit of the concept of inherent simplicity. See, there are many of us, I'm not alone in this, people like Tom Gill, like Don Reinertsen, Peter Merrill, Wolfram Mueller, Niels as well, I'm sure, who believe that you can look at the system and discern a lot of what's going on in the system. That does not mean it's deterministic or totally predictable. This is one of the misunderstandings. If I'm here and I have an idea of the product I want here, it doesn't mean I can predict every individual step to get here. No, I don't know how to do that. But what I do know is possible is there's a way to go from here to here with a predictable scope, predictable budget, predictable cost. And there's a lot of evidence for this. Tom Gill was posting something where almost no programs do it, but a lot do. And there's a great book called How Big Things Get Done. I recommend this. It's an enjoyable read. And it'll contradict a lot of stuff that people in the Agile space seem to think is true. And then you got to think a little bit. Well, he's got evidence. I mean, some of the things are pretty clear, but some of the things you got to think about for a little bit. And it's a brilliant anecdotal book and talks about how you can take on big projects and actually do them in an effective, predictable manner. So the fact that you can't predict every individual step of the way doesn't mean you can't predict going from here to there. You ever drive in the fog? But so you know you're going to go slower perhaps because of the constraint, but you can predict how long it's going to take you to get from where you are to where you want to go, but you don't know every little step along the way. Agile does not mean you can't predict the long term. I've been meaning to write about no estimates, but I figure that's just going to get me into a problem. No estimates at the team level may make sense because you can just make your story small, but no estimates at the top level doesn't. We can estimate large projects. I've seen it done. Now, this does not justify management from saying how long it's going to take. See, these are two different things. Estimating how long it's going to take based on reality is quite different than management saying this is how long it's going to take. Those are two different things. In fact, a lot of the reason people has management say how long it's going to take is because the development teams won't say predictably how long it's going to take. So a lot of this is caused by this lack of problems. Now, I'm going to tie 3 or 4 things I've said together now. And this is one of the big disempowering beliefs. You can start with teams in the same way we used to think you could start with the pieces, put them together and have a good system. And the answer is no. I've seen over and over again, teams start, some company wants to do Agile. So they start with a Scrum team. It works really well. Then they do another Scrum team. It works really well. Then another Scrum team. It works really well. And then all of a sudden they can't go any further. And the reason is they figured out how to get a teamwork. Those problems are quite different from the organization problems. You ever notice that? You can work great with a team, but you can't talk to another team well. That takes an holistic view of things. That's important. The problem is Scrum still insists on this, let's glom them up from the front. Now, SAFe, I'm not a proponent of SAFe. I've used SAFe successfully, and if you want to know, look at I have a post on it. When I used to do SAFe, I used to do it very successfully. But that was only because I never did SAFe by the book. I added things to it, and I took some things away from it. And when Dean Leffingwell, the CEO at the time, said I had to do SAFe by the book twice to keep my certification as a trainer, I quit. I was not going to put 2 clients through the wrong thing to keep my certification. You need an holistic view. This is one of the biggest disempowering. The other thing you need to do is figure out what the cause and effect that's present in the system. Now, I'm not wanting you to believe me on this last one or even the first one, but I'm going to come from that space. Okay, this is the precursor. We'll talk more about this next week, or we won't, but I'll give you assignments. And what you should use is the LinkedIn group to ask me questions. Don't send me emails. If you send me an email, I'm just going to say, put it on the LinkedIn group. Okay. Here's the thing. The reason I can make a list of like problems and solutions is because of cause and effect that I know is out there. Now, does that mean I know everything that's out there? No. You know what I'm saying? You can know a lot that's out there. The interesting thing is when you actually take advantage of what you know, the stuff you didn't know starts becoming apparent. The stuff that complexity obscures gets revealed when you take advantage of what you know. So anyway, so I was looking at, just take that top one off perhaps, but I was looking at what are problems we see in the requirement space or the challenges it causes. And I'll give you, I'm going to send an email out for all of you that has this link, but and then what are the solutions? What are the benefits? So what I realized is in this GPS thing, what we were doing is we're basically asking them what their problems are. And these are the common ones I've seen. You'll see that I've got problems in requirements and in workflow, workload, being overloaded, executives and managers, people, the rate of improvement. But what's interesting is, so the GPS starts out by asking what the problems are. But what I like about this is a Lucid board, by the way. I like Lucid more than Miro. I used to do Miro. I do Lucid now. It's a lot more powerful, easier, not as frustrating. You could also use this to look to see what's missing. So we realized, when you're doing a GPS, a diagnostic, you could look through what they should be doing. See, these are things they should be doing, because if they don't do these, they're going to get these problems. That's another way to look at it. See, if you don't understand what minimum valuable increments are, you're going to deliver more in the release than what's necessary. It's a given. It'll happen. Now, maybe it doesn't. There are exceptions. So I'm 98% accurate. That's good enough. So this is useful. Questions on this? This is important to take a look. You can look at one thing, the solutions, benefits. These two comments here, as I realized in a diagnosis, you can look here to see what's missing and look here to tell you what's going on. So this is a useful table to help you do a diagnosis, even without my GPS tool. Here, hang on a second. I've got an opening link, I'm pretty sure. Start here. Yeah. Here, I'll put this in the chat. Okay, here's a link to the board. Okay. But there's another side to this. This is what I want to start looking at. And then I'll get into the values first. Because I don't have a lot to say about the values first. It's more of a statement. So these are the disempowering beliefs we've got to overcome. We'll spend more time on this when I talk about the choice. And again, you could do it this way. Well, instead of telling you what you don't want to believe, what do you believe? Just slide these over here. Oh, this is the employee attitude. This is the attitude I take. You need theory and practice to be effective. I've said this many times, and I've got a chapter in the Values Coach book about Semmelweis where he had data. He had so much data, it was ridiculous and it was dramatic, and people did not want to do what he said because he had no theory to explain why it worked. You get resistance when you don't do this. So here's an interesting thing. These are two separate things, but this is how I want you to start thinking in this program. And when you don't believe something up here, the first thing you should do is then challenge me on it. Well, no, the first thing you should do is try to understand it. And then when you don't understand it, then challenge me on it. I mean, don't read it. Don't spend any time. Oh, I don't like that. Just send me an email. No, read it. Don't like it. Think about it for a few minutes, then send me an email. Okay. But don't sleep on it. Well, you could sleep on it, but make sure I get that email. The reason I say you can sleep on it, it actually might give you clarity on why you don't like it. This is funny. I didn't mean, oh, then you'll agree with me. I didn't mean that at all. I meant sleeping on it. Sometimes your subconscious does things in the middle of the night. So if you want to sleep on it, okay, but I'm happy you just shoot me an email after you thought about it a couple of minutes. Okay, so here's the idea. We're saying that there is, underneath all this, there's a set of root cause and effects that we can explain. Okay, that's my supposition. That's where I'm coming from over the next 4 weeks. Questions on that? Well, okay, you should be raising your hand if you. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about what I said I was going to talk about for this week, but it's really a simple thing. Who is it? Yogi Berra says, if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter what path you take. Actually, Lewis Carroll talked about that when Alice in Wonderland is talking to the Cheshire Cat, and she says, I can't remember the exact words, but she says, which way should I take? And he says, well, where do you want to go? So I'm not really sure. It doesn't matter which way you take. What is the purpose we're trying to do? So you tell me, put it in the chat or just blurt out, what are we trying to do in this thing we call Agile? Expecting an answer, somebody.
Delivering value to customers or stakeholders.
Delivering value to your customer. Okay.
Quickly.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I amended it by saying delivering value to stakeholders quickly and repeatedly.
Okay, returning value to stakeholders quickly and repeatedly, and I would add maybe learning how to do better, but you've left off who the stakeholders are. Or you open that question. No, that's good. I like that answer better because customers are stakeholders, but there are other stakeholders. So who are our stakeholders and which ones should we listen to?
Product owners, leadership.
Leadership, I could buy. Product owners, are we adding value to product owners or are they helping us find out what the value we should add?
It's the company.
They're still stakeholders. Anybody who
Oh,
has
they are still stakeholders. That's right. Product owners are stakeholders. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, but are those the stakeholders we should be listening to? Yeah, Tony.
I'm reminded of a phrase, the people paying the bills should certainly be given an ear.
Yeah. Yeah, see, this is
They're
it's
not the only ones, I suppose, I'm
yeah.
learning here, but that
Well,
does come to mind.
let me use Southwest as an example because it's an interesting question. And excuse me, I believe it has an answer, but it's not talked about enough. And I guess I'm biased by my studying with Tom Guild for a long time. So look at Southwest Airlines. You know how many customers ask for meals in flight? That would be value if they gave meals in flight. A lot do. But that's not what the company's up to, meals in flight. There's a reason Southwest just has snacks. The reason is by not having meals, they have a quicker turnover. By the way, it's interest turnaround of the planes. By the way, Alaska has started doing something similar to this. You can get meals, but you have to order them before the flight. It enables things to be faster. The turnaround, that's why now Southwest is running into problems for other reasons. They've mismanaged the company the last 2, 3, 4 years. Their IT department is in shambles. I don't know this firsthand, but I've been reading and following because it's a shame when you see a great company, I think now no longer be great. They have so many internal problems, and you can see where they've mismanaged some of their infrastructure. But originally, they were able to keep costs low by basically having quick turnarounds of the aircraft, which meant they got an extra flight or two a day from their craft. Okay, this is very important because the jet fuel is expensive, but the airplanes are also expensive. So they could get more out of their planes. Also, they probably get, I didn't even thought about this till just now, they probably get more out of their flight crews because it's the amount of time you're on the plane and you got limitations by the government, all sorts of things. Anyway, so there are a lot of stakeholders. Some of the stakeholders are like leaders of the organization. Some of the stakeholders are like customers. Some of the stakeholders, Patrick, like you mentioned, are internal, the people who are building the stuff. Some of the stakeholders are the government, FAA and Southwest's example. So you can have this debate about who the stakeholders are. You know, so we could talk for hours in general about stakeholders, and you'd find that in some cases, different companies have different stakeholders that are important. Does it make sense? I mean, sometimes you're driven by the customer, sometimes you're driven by your vision. Like what I'm doing now, in a sense, I'm driven by the people in the Amplio University program, but I'm really trying to also be driven by the bigger community that aren't my customers yet. Okay, because I'm trying to create something new. When you're an entrepreneur, you're sometimes driven not by your existing customers, but by the customer base you envision that you're using the existing customers to get to. So it's a complicated problem, and there's not an answer. That's what I'm trying to get to. Not a specific answer, but I would suggest this, that there are some critical stakeholders you have to decide are driving this. And those will typically be the leaders of the organization who have set the strategy, some key marketing customers that decide on what's going to satisfy them, government agencies, or if you're using certain tools, then it's actually, if there are constraints put on you by other systems you have to interact with, then those are critical stakeholders. In other words, I forget what it's called. There's a big computer system. I used to know all this. I used to work in the airline business or company Sabre. It was with Sabre, but yeah, I guess it is called Sabre. They have this system that has all the flights and everything in it. And if you're an airline and you want to, now Southwest built their own because for other reasons, but mostly you have to know how to work with that system. That's a constraint. That's a critical stakeholder. Or build your own. And now your IT department is a critical stakeholder. Does this make sense? This gives us guidance. If you do not have this, you will not get alignment. Why is this important? See, I'm going to go full circle back to the beginning. I know I was maybe rambling or ranting, but I had a target. The target is if you've got a lot of individual teams, you've got to coordinate them if they're individual teams with their own vision. Does that make sense? That's what the product owner does. You know how inefficient that is? You know how insane that is from an effective point of view? It's herding cats at this point. Cats are the easiest thing to herd if you've got a laser pointer, let me tell you. Easy. Because now they have a common vision. Get that damn dot. So if you can get an agreement on these are our critical stakeholders, and this is their success criteria, and this is their the constraints they have, called budget, perhaps, called dollars, called time, called quality. See, if you can get that, do you see how now instead of coordination, alignment might be possible? So this is maybe one of the biggest disempowering beliefs. I don't even know if I got it up here, but I sometimes discover by talking about it. Let's see. See, I've already mentioned this. Starting at team level is good. No, you got to start at the value stream. Well, so where would we put this? Where would we put this? We would put this, well, it's definitely sourced in Scrum. But see, this is what gets me about Scrum. I still talk about it, is because even though a lot of it's not Scrum is not agile. Scrum, I got to say the different one. Scrum is a type of attempt to get agile. Like a Volvo is a kind of a car, but Volvos and cars aren't the same thing. So I'm not saying if Scrum gets you agile or doesn't get you agile, because it can get you agile. It doesn't always, but it's not the same thing as agile in that sense. And what I'm suggesting is that relying on coordination I'm amazed I didn't have this in here. Relying on coordination, you get teams to work well together by using coordination. And I would suggest alignment is much more effective than coordination. Lucid doesn't help my spelling, unfortunately. But then I take solace in Mark Twain's comment, never trust a man who can only spell a word one way. They lack creativity. So we have this flip. Again, come from the bottom up, causes all sorts of problems. You can't see the whole thing. And then the question becomes, if you've got to take holistic value, then where are you being driven from? Guess what? You drive from the values. You got to identify your critical stakeholders, identify their values, their success criteria, and their constraints. So that's how I got to where I got to. So identify your critical stakeholders. Remember, this is all the people you mentioned are potential critical stakeholders. What are their values, success criteria, and constraints? Now, I'm not saying this is easy, but you at least need to do it. And then you come from there. This creates the context for everything. Now, everything is designed under this context. Does that make sense? So here's the thing. Obviously, this is not an intense workshop. We go into this in more detail in Amplio-U, although to be candid, I don't know we've gone into this enough yet in Amplio-U. I don't think we have. But see, here's the interesting thing. This gives us a direction. Now, why have I been talking about this when the book I've been talking about is The Rules of Flow? Okay, I do have a plan. By the way, does somebody who's read this book have a better book? There's a reason I think this is the right book to do, but if anybody has a better idea, let me tell you why I like this book so much. Now, she will not talk about this values thing I talked about. But what I like about this is there are two things I like, maybe three things I like about this. One thing I like about it, it's first of all based on Goldrat's inherent simplicity and theory of constraints and flow. So I like that. Actually, let me show you something there. I know I put it up here. I can find it again now. The TOC page. Oh, that's weird. Get out of here. Okay. By the way, I have a little bit of problems with the way everybody thinks about the TOC. These are the people who are kind of like the authority on it, but they have something really good here that I think is really, really important. See, the goal, he has gone 2 generations past the goal. So this is not his thinking anymore. The goal was his first book years and years ago, maybe not his first book. It's also heavily manufacturing oriented. But this is brilliant. I'm going to give you a minute to drink this. I'm not drink this. I was thinking of drinking coffee. That's Freudian slip. Read these 3 assumptions. These are brilliant. It's the most concise statement of the philosophy I've ever seen. Kind of raise your hand and put it down when you've finished reading, so not much time. Okay. Okay, so this is important. This is where I'm coming from, is this. And again, by the way, you can kind of get a sense of agreement, but not understand it and still ask me questions. In other words, it's not if you disagree, you ask. It's, well, I get it, but I don't get it fully. But so what I'm saying is we're coming from this. We want flow of value. I'm adding on top of this, we have to identify our critical stakeholders. And I'm using I seem to have lost the book again. I might have 2 windows open here. Uh, Goldrat's rules of flow. You know what could be interesting? I've never done this. I'd have to figure out if you could even do this. This is on a Kindle. I know that you could have other people's content, comments show up. I wonder if you could make a reading group on this. I'll bet you can. That seems a kind of idea. I'm going to look at the. Does anybody know that? Like you all in a reading group, and then everybody's comments in that group show up in the same thing. I wouldn't be surprised if they've got that. Um, if somebody would figure that out, like as a group, it would be cool.
This is my I think they offer book clubs now on Amazon. Um, and this is probably where we can do some particular collaboration now because productivity tools, all this stuff, that's my jam. So I'm happy to look into that.
Yeah, look at that. So the idea would be, and it could be open. I'd let anybody into the book club, but if it's a book club on this, and then as a group, as we go through this, people can make comments or questions. It'll be a great way
Yeah.
to coordinate it. It'd be really brilliant. Yeah, if you would, Brian, thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, so what we're doing here then is what we're saying is I haven't really explained how to do this, but no, that's something we need to figure out. Okay. And that may or may not happen in the community practice sessions. That's really kind of an advanced topic in Employee University. But you need to do that. You need to get the direction you're going. Well, let me show you the thing about Goldrat's book here, because I'll pull it up right here. This is the choice. I love this, but that's not the one I'm talking about. Here, this is my Kindle library. What I wanted to show you, see at the end, she's got this really nice summary of things. but this is a real easy read. I read it in a couple hours, and I'm not a fast reader. And it's a story type thing, and it's not software. It's more manufacturing based as well, but it definitely is applicable. And it's a good story about how to focus on things. But I'm sorry, one thing I wanted to explain is the thing about this, though, then see, as soon as they give you the background, they jump into the 5 focusing steps. Now, the problem with the 5 focusing steps, and this is, I'm not saying there's something wrong with TOC because see, sometimes there's something wrong with the theory, and sometimes it just nudges you in the wrong direction. This is one of those, I'm being nudged in the wrong direction. It ends up talking about how to exploit, you find the constraint and how to exploit the constraint. Now you're looking local, and sometimes you need to look across. That looking across is what I want to see. And you'll see in her book, she does that. Okay. So basically, this is it. This is what I want to do the next 4 weeks. I admit it's an experiment. It's going to be flipped classroom. I'm going to give you assignments. Our way of communicating with each other is going to be oh, this was a rant, but I couldn't help myself. This is my last thing. If you follow me, it might be interesting if you want to see my last. I mean, this is part of the thing. I guess I just oh, well, this is my post that kicks this off. That's right. Okay. I'll give you a list when I do the email. There are 2 or 3 posts that I've written recently that I think would be worth reading. So this is going to take some energy on your part, but I'm going to help guide you. But I will show this. This is something I wrote this morning. There are 2 posts I wrote this morning. I mean, in the last couple of days. So further down, Brian, I made this a little softer for you.
Nice, appreciate it.
Yeah, you're right. I get around a little bit. But I do think that this way of doing things, using the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again. And this morning I wrote something though that's kind of interesting because here's what I guess I just don't get. I really don't get. When you read this makes no sense to me. You don't know when it will or won't work. Provides no theory. You can tell what I'm talking about. These are all things they say. See, this is what the Amplio system. You got a diagnostic based on self-verifiable. Now I need to add another one. I just did the opposite here. I need to add the other one is you need to know what your value is. I got to change this to make sure I put the value first in, which is totally missing. I guess I could say is oriented around the team versus oriented around the value of the organization. Okay. So I'll get an email out later today with some of these LinkedIn posts, but you can always just go to me. It's easy. You go to and then you can scroll down and, you see the activity. So that's the easy way to see what I'm doing. You can bookmark that. Okay. Any questions or comments or concerns about this thing? Are you interested? This is totally volunteer, of course. I'm just curious if this makes you more or less interested, or you're just going to wait till I show up in a month.
Well, Thomas and I are interested.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thomas also has the very best background in the entire world. I want to be where Thomas is in that photo.
Yeah. Thomas and I have known for each other for a long time.
Awesome.
I have a feeling you and him, it's funny, I didn't say this before, but I have this feeling. So for those who don't know, Thomas and Brian are both in the Amplio University, as are actually Patrick and Susan here. But I have a feeling you're going to be best buds and bothering me. Although it isn't the bother, of course. Rather, I should say, thankfully telling me what I left out or what I should have said instead. I know the 2 are going to be buddies in that. And when you discover that and collaborate with each other, boy, I'm going to have a good time. So, okay, so I'm going to get an email out later today that'll give you some of these LinkedIn posts. But really, get a copy of Goldratt's Rules of Flow, and I'd spend a little bit of time on this place, this Miro board that I put in the chat. I'll send another link out to that. There's a wealth of information here. Okay, any other questions? And let's do this experiment. Also, the flipped classroom, if you can see how I can do it better, let me know. Because I've never quite done something like this, but I want to try it. Okay, well,
So just
care.
one more comment. You had asked if people recommend other books on flow.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I put that in the chat that I
Oh, what
think
was it?
Steve Pereira's Flow Engineering.
Oh yeah, the thing
That's a
is,
pretty
I
good one.
just started reading that. Is that a good intro to Agile, or not just a good book on? I'm not looking for a book on flow. I'm looking good book on intro to Agile. Although everybody here already knows Agile.
Yeah, I think it's has a good focus on Agile at scale and what the specific problems of scale are. Not so much at the team level, but at large organizations.
Okay, so why don't we pick one or the other? I think that's a good idea. I'd forgotten about Steve's book because I've just been starting to read that. Steve understands value streams better than me. I think
Yeah, and value stream mapping is really a core concept of that book.
yeah, the problem I have with value stream mapping is sometimes it's just so difficult to get the time for it. But
Yeah.
okay, so well, I'll read that one. So you read either one of these. Since I've already read Rules of Flow, I'll read this one and then we can talk about both. Okay, we'll do that. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. See, I tell you what he does. He just saw a good example of it, and I appreciate it. It's all great. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.